Again, my name is Ted Clement. I'm the Executive Director of Save Mount Diablo, and we want to welcome you all to our Nature Heals and Inspires Zoom series. For those of you who might be new to Save Mount Diablo, we are a nationally accredited not-for-profit land trust formed in 1971 in the East Bay part of the San Francisco Bay Area. We have a mission to protect the important open space lands associated with Mount Diablo and the mountain's connection to its sustaining Diablo range. To create lasting public benefits such as parks and trails, we use various tools like land acquisition, advocacy, education, and stewardship. Understanding that nature is the ultimate foundation for our long-term health and well-being, we developed a free public education Zoom series entitled Nature Heals and Inspires to help our communities understand that nature is a critical part of the solution of working through these challenging times. In a study of 20,000 people by the European Center for Environment and Human Health, it was found that people who spend at least 2 hours a week outside in nature, either all at once or spread over the week, were substantially more likely to report good health and psychological well-being than those who didn't. Beyond health and psychological benefits, going outside to connect with nature will help address what I believe to be the most serious environmental problem facing our planet. After studying and working in conservation for decades, I've come to realize that the most significant threat to the environment is the lack of meaningful connections between people and nature, which results in us lacking the love and will required to fully address major environmental threats like the climate crisis. Thankfully, nature is a spiritual portal where if we quietly and respectfully enter it with open hearts and minds, we will be transformed for the better, and in that lies our hope for salvation and survival. Our Nature Heals and Inspires Zoom series started in April 2020, and to date we have delivered over 20 presentations by an amazing and diverse group of experts exploring this topic of how nature helps heal and inspire us. And through this exploration, we've been getting important clues on how to align ourselves and our culture with the natural world we are a part of. Thankfully, because of your wonderful support, Save Mount Diablo continues to uplift our communities with our usual nonprofit land conservation work for the Mount Diablo area, along with additional efforts like our Nature Heals and Inspires Zoom series and our weekly lighting of the beacon atop Mount Diablo on Sunday after sunset until sunrise on Monday, so that we can thank our heroes, pay our respects, come together, and collectively lift our eyes to the light in nature amidst this pandemic. Today, we have a special gift of gratitude and inspiration from Hawaii for you, our supporters. Dr. Scott Fisher of the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust in his presentation, Ecological Restoration, Healing the Land, Healing a Community, a Lesson from Hawaii. Dr. Scott Fisher is the Associate Executive Director of Conservation for the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust. The Hawaiian Islands Land Trust is a terrific and outstanding land trust, a statewide land trust, and Scott and his family live on Maui. Scott has been doing great conservation work in Hawaii for almost 2 decades. I had the pleasure of serving alongside Scott when I worked for the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust. Scott is a friend, a talented and trusted conservation colleague, and a wonderful ambassador of the Hawaiian culture and spirit of aloha. Together, we will continue to do great things to protect the ultimate foundation for our long-term health and well-being, nature. Scott, mahalo for your good work and for providing this gift of gratitude and inspiration to our supporters. Scott, please take it away and everybody.
All right, aloha mai kakou, and thank you for that introduction, Ted. As Ted pointed out, I am the Associate Executive Director of Conservation. That title does seem to be changing. I think soon I will be officially the Director of Aina Protection. Aina just meaning land, which is just a part of who we are. What we do at the Hawaii Land Trust. And again, we've also had a name change recently. So you will see during this presentation, and you may find that I'm actually mentioning the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust, but we are officially now the Hawaii Land Trust. So, and that was just a matter of weeks ago. So if I do say that, I apologize. But I was born and raised on the island of Maui, and other than my time in the Marine Corps and in school, I've lived on Maui my entire life. So I just want to give this presentation to you as an indication of how a community can both be healed while also healing the land. And so I'm going to go over an introduction to the Hawaii Land Trust. Then I'll go specifically into our work at Waihee, which you see here in this photograph. I'll give you an introduction and orientation to Waihee at the time of the purchase in 2004. We started managing the land in 2003, but in 2004 we purchased it. How we engage the community, how we heal the ecosystems, and kind of going over some of our restoration work, our education programs, and then what we call our talk story on the land, which are also known as our huaka'i maka'i kai, which is our way of engaging the community on the land through hikes. So let me see. There we go. So healing the land, healing ourselves, ecological restoration and community building on Waihee, Maui, 2003 to 2021. So as an introduction, the Hawaii Land Trust, we protect over 20,000 acres on 5 islands through both permanent conservation easements and fee ownership of land. And Waihee is one of those fee-owned lands. Of course, we have about 53 conservation easements. So that is the bulk of how we protect the land. So our mission is to protect and steward the lands that sustain Hawaii and to perpetuate Hawaiian values by connecting people with Aina. So as you can see, connection with people is a critical part, connecting with people to the land is a critical part of what we do. So our vision in olelo Hawaii, in the Hawaiian language, is I ola ka Aina, I ola mako ne. When the lands thrive, the people will also thrive. So it's a very, very straightforward connection that we see, is that our health is related to the health of the land. So 2 guiding principles which direct our work is an olelo no'eau, a traditional Hawaiian proverb, which is he ali'i ka aina, he kaua ke kanaka. The land is the chief and humans are the servants. So that really situates humans where we are in the general landscape. And the other, of course, is hulina lima i ka lepo, mauna ka opu. By turning our hands into the soil, we will all be well fed. So that is a call to action, a call to work on the land. So as you can see in this photograph, this is an indication of some of the stars indicate where lands that we have protected across Kapai Aina, across the archipelago. The bulk of our lands, both by numerical acreage as well as the number of easements, is on Maui. If you can see where my cursor is, that indicates Waihee. That star right there indicates the Waihee Coastal Dunes and Wetlands Refuge, which I'll be talking about most. So in October of 2003, the predecessor of the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust, the Maui Coastal Land Trust, began the management of the Waihee Coastal Dunes and Wetlands Refuge, which we ended up purchasing it in 2004, in July of 2004. So our mission was threefold at the time. We set out with 3 goals: to restore degraded ecosystems for the benefit of endangered species, and I'll show you those endangered species in just a moment. And in particular, we sought out to do work in a 27-acre wetlands that are home to 2 endangered water birds, as well as a number of other migratory species and visitors. The second dimension of our work was focused on preserving and protecting the numerous archaeological sites. So as there are at least 93 now, 93 state listed archaeological sites. When I mention that, it just means that what they found between 1988 and 2003 were in archaeological inventory surveys came to about 93. And those range from small sites like midden, collection of what you might think of as opala or trash that accumulates outside of a dwelling, things like fish bones or shells, all the way up to very large temple sites, ritual sites known as heiau. And so every phase of Hawaiian history is represented on this particular 277-acre refuge. And The third thing we wanted to do, and I'll be going through all of these, is to provide educational opportunities for students of all ages. If you're on the land, we want you to learn why the site is such an important place. What in Hawaii we call a wahipana, a place both of the ancestors, but where we can actually connect with our land. So again, the red indicates where the Waihe'e Refuge is, the Waihee Coastal Dunes and Wetlands Refuge on Maui. For those of you who've been here, you might be more familiar. It's of course, on the northwest coast, on the ko'olau or windward side of the island. And there is an aerial photograph. This actual photograph shows some of the features, and I'll be going over this in the next slide as well. But I just want to point out these sand dunes. These are which gives the refuge's names, Waihee Coastal Dunes and Wetlands. These are the sand dunes here, 105 acres. Mythologically, they are connected to the goddess Haumea, who is said to have created these particular dunes in order to provide a windbreak to a very sacred tree known as Kalau ke Kahuli. And in the center of the wetlands, you can see it's marked by a dairy canal. This area was a dairy between 1919 and 1970. This is the center of the wetlands. So one of our restoration work was to work around that wetlands area. And again, this is an overhead view. This demarcates the boundary of the refuge. What I want to indicate here is, of course, that Waihee stream. So this is a stream of about 30 million gallons daily. I think by continental standards, it would be a very, a large brook or a very small stream, but for us, the largest river we have in Maui. Another stream runs down through here that is known as Kappa. The wetlands are in the center here, and then of course we have those 105 acres of sand dunes. But our main focal point, our main work for our ecological restoration was centered in that wetlands. So. And then, of course, we have about 1.5 miles of coastline. And the other thing I want to indicate is, or point out, is these. This is the town of Waihee. Again, Waihee being a very, it's a wahipana. There's a lot of and mythological stories associated with this town, predominantly ethnically Hawaiian. There's also on the very edge, you can see that is what's known as the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. That's Wai'ehu Ko for those who are 50% Native Hawaiian or greater. So that's kind of the setting. So the endangered species that we are working to restore to the site include the Hawaiian Stilt, the IO, which is a subspecies of the black-necked stilt, which is probably fairly common in your area. They're found throughout North America. Then we have the Hawaiian Coot, which again is a subspecies of the American coot. We call it the alai ke'o. And then again, we have a hatchling green sea turtle, honu, on the shoreline, and occasional visits by Hawaiian monk seals, one of only 2 species of monk seals left in the world. So this is the Hawaiian monk seal, and lounging on the beach at Waihee. So looks like that monk seal is having a great time. They typically come out and molt on our shoreline in July. So that's when we can kind of expect to see them. So when we purchased the property, I think, in reflecting on the path, the journey that we've taken in Waihee, that the Hawaii Land Trust has taken through Waihee, it was, I think the thing that becomes most clear is that what we've accomplished was by no means guaranteed. And I just kind of want to try and paint a portrait, and I'll do that in some photographs, but marine debris littered the shoreline. It is an area where marine debris tends to collect. So within the first year, we had already collected over 4 tons of marine debris. And that is nets, ropes, just about anything you can imagine coming from a fishing fleet, including a load of industrial rubber that apparently fell off of one of the ships. So in addition to that, it had been kind of long abused for many years. And so there were about 26 cars that had been abandoned. on the refuge. And then of course, invasive species, which are a common feature of low elevation Hawaiian ecosystems. But I want to just suggest that this area, because it's somewhat remote, but still close to main town, oftentimes attracted some of the nefarious behavior. And so we spent a lot of time making inroads with people to try and stop that type of activity and to keep eyes and ears awake to what was going on. This was a critical thing. The other thing I want to point out is that our first meeting with the Waihee community, we very nearly were chased out of the building. Some of the board members at the time suggested that we were coming in, well, their words were taken as meaning that we were coming in to save the land. And that did not go over well. Hawaiian cultural values really appreciate what's known as ha'a, which is humility. And that was not seen as being particularly humble. And therefore we got for that and some other reasons, we got sort of a negative reception initially, and that had to be addressed too. And so there's a lot of suspicion. One thing to point out is that between 1988 and our purchase in 2004, this was a destination golf course. Now, it was slated to become a destination golf course, and that had really divided the community. There were people who were in favor of it, mainly in favor of it because the golf course was seen as a better option than some of the other options that they were facing, like the condominium development or something like that. So some of them saw a golf course as being not something that they wanted necessarily, but something that they could live with. So just want to try and paint that portrait of that. So here we are, one of literally my first day. We organized the removal of about 2 tons worth of marine debris with we did a massive beach cleanup with a number of volunteers. So this is us pulling off some of those fishing nets right off the shoreline. Again, cannot stress enough how much trash had accumulated from the ocean. Here you can see some of the abandoned items. And the top picture is just household trash. There are about, as I mentioned earlier, about 26 cars that had been abandoned on the property. Batteries in the lower picture in the lower left, tires that had been just simply abandoned. So it was, it needed some care and what we say aloha, some aloha aina, love of the land. And again, invasive species. So like most coastal ecosystems in Hawaii, this is kind of what the condition was when we purchased the property. So in the foreground, you can see invasive species. Those are African grasses known as, that species known as Pennisetum purpureum. We also have African tulip, which is, the tree species. So I just want to emphasize that it was a highly degraded ecosystem. This is on the edge of the wetlands. And so I'll show you some other pictures. But what we decided to do was to build community support. We wanted to engage with volunteers to assist us in our ecological restoration work, knowing full well that as you hulina lima ika lepo, if you put your hands in the soil, we will all be much healthier for it. So as I mentioned earlier, our ecological restoration work is the process of restoring native ecosystems to their pre-disturbance structure, function, and composition. So trying to restore an ecosystem to ensure that that it looks like what it did prior to its disturbance before the invasive species came in. So the majority of the work involved removing invasive species and then replanting them with appropriate indigenous species. And I should also have added endemic species as well. So those endemic and indigenous species are critical to the process of ecological restoration. Our goal is to, of course, improve biodiversity, ecological productivity. So in this case, specifically in the endangered species that I mentioned earlier, and resilience to future disturbances. As a coastal ecosystem, we are very subject to tsunamis, which we had in 2011. We had a March 11th, 2011, we were impacted by the tsunami. Fortunately, we were able to see that our work in restoring between 2003 and 2011 did wonders for improving ecosystem resilience. So that was a real benefit to the land. So we just literally jumped in. This is, if you can believe it, and you're going to see some pictures in just a moment, but if you can believe it, this is almost dead center in the wetlands. It was covered with invasive species. The species behind me, that's me with what's called a billy goat brush cutter. You just try and mow everything down. We had, again, mostly African grasses. That's to my left is, to the right of the picture is a species known as Cenchrus. Kiave, which is Prosopis pallido or mesquite, a very aggressive phreatophyte. It actually removes a lot of moisture from the ecosystem. So, but that's it. You just jump right in and just got to do it. Excuse me. All right, but then we enlisted a number of volunteers, as I mentioned. So this is a group from Hawaiian Canoe Club. Hawaiian Canoe Club is a competitive, traditional Hawaiian canoe paddling organization, and they are always looking for their young people to get involved in community work, community-related restoration, land healing work, and this is the group that we had out there. So they were very enthusiastic. Although it's hot and humid, their enthusiasm never seems to wane, and it's always very exciting. So that's them working. This is a group from Kamehameha Schools, which is a school set up by the Bernice Pauahi Bishop Trust that serves primarily Native Hawaiian students. And so this is a group from that school. And this is what they are removing. You can see the machete and the gentleman in the blue shirt. They are removing a very, very aggressive shrub species known as Plukia indica, trying to push that back. And they are actually working in a village, what we call Kapoho village, that was inhabited between about 1450 and about 1820. So they are literally, and these young people here, and they're juniors and seniors in high school, are literally uncovering the sites where their ancestors lived, which is always really exciting, because I can't tell you the number of times I've brought people down on the property and they can actually document their genealogy, what's known in Hawaiian as their mo'oku auhau, back to these sites. So it's very exciting to see these things happening. And so there we go. You know, a modicum of victory is always getting the roots out of these particular invasive species. This is a group from what's known as the old Lahaina Luau, which is it's a luau, a traditional Hawaiian festival held in Lahaina, primarily for the visitors. But these, so they're workers at the luau. They love to come down and reconnect with the land. And again, most of them, I would say, I'd qualify that more by saying many of them actually have roots in Waihee. So it's pretty exciting. And of course, we reach out to volunteers of all ages. On the right is our very consistent volunteers, the Arakawas. The Arakawas were in their early 80s, but yet they came out every single Friday from 8 to noon with a chainsaw in hand and working the land. So the Arakawas, and just wonderful people. And you know, to this day, we get about 1,500 volunteer hours on the refuge every year. So. And again, from another group from a local high school, they were helping us here, moving some plants out, some native plants back in. You can see where we've, with the help of our volunteers, where we've actually been able to remove the invasive species in the background. And then in the foreground, of course, at their feet are a native species that we are hoping to plant. And as you'll see, there we are planting them. So this is a native species being planted. The woman in the white shirt is actually our education coordinator, which you'll see her in just a moment. So this is the ecological restoration work, putting in native, this is sedges in this case. This is a native sedge known as Ahuaba. And this is what it began to look like. So what you're seeing is the area where I had as I began this discussion, the area where I was using that tool that looked like a big mower, what we call a billy goat brush cutter. And this is all back to native species now. This is in the middle of the wetlands, actually in a fish pond that was built in the 1500s. It's dry. It's gone back to being a wetlands, a intermittent wetlands, what's known as a pedestrian discharge wetlands, because the water has been cut off. But everything you see in the foreground is a native species. So again, wanting to emphasize the efficacy and the power of getting the community involved. And this is, just a few short years at this spot here was only a few short years after we began the work. And so then again, this is a more recent picture. Those you can actually see in the background, again, in the white shirt is my colleague, James Crow. And behind him is the plants that we were actually planting with at the time that the previous photo was taken. And you can see here, these trees, this is another native tree known as Holla or Pandanus tectorius. And so we are, and I'll show you in just a moment what our goal is as we try to prepare as best we can for climate change. All right, so that is, again, same area, different angle. Looking back, you can see the dunes in the background. Again, almost everything in here is native, and our volunteers hard at work. If you look along the base of the dune, if you look carefully along the base of the dune here, you can see some more mature Holla. What we are trying to do right now, besides just getting the native species back, we have to assemble them. We have to, follow the rules of assembly for that particular species. Getting those native species back in, we spent the last, between 2017 and 2019 doing intensive study on the what's called the Paleo ecology, the past history of this particular ecosystem going back to about 12,000 years, and getting the species composition well understood, as well as the structure of the ecosystem. And so in this case, what we're trying to do is mimic what that ecosystem looked like back to about 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last glacial maximum. And so in addition to that, we are also keenly aware that climate change will bring dramatic shifts in the ecosystem. As you can see, those sand dunes, although they are partially lithified, they have some stability. If heavy rains come that we anticipate, and they are actually already happening, that heavy rain will cause erosion down the slope. And if water, with that water will be carried sand, and that sand can clog out the wetland, it will choke out the wetlands. So what we're doing is we're planting those trees in a pattern that actually mimics what the ecosystem looked like 12,000 years ago, but also functions how it once did. And so that's a very important element of our restoration work. And so I want to just kind of go back in time. So this is, go back in time to 2004. This is what the ecosystem looked like on the verge of our restoration, on the very, very beginning of the restoration work, before we really started any intensive work. The spot where I was working was here. So you've kind of gotten a glimpse what it looked like from this vantage point. So I'll just kind of go through these 3 slides. So this is after we cleared it. So we removed all the invasive species as best we could, kept them at bay. And then this is what it looked like when the rains came back. So we work seasonally. Hawaii really only has 2 seasons. We have what's known as the kauwela, or the hot season. While we also have the ho'oilo, which is the wet season. And so this is when the rains return. This is what the wetlands look like. And it had not really looked like this for at least since the early 20th century, before 1919. So we were very excited to see this return of the water, and we've been very successful in that. So the next phase we moved into, and this is all ongoing. There's nothing. It's not like we stop one and move on. We're constantly adding additional work that we want to do. But the second task that we began to focus on was the restoration of taro patches, or lo'ikalo, and that began in 2009. So for those who don't know, taro is the staple crop of the Hawaiian people, the most idealized, mythologized crop in Hawaii. But taro is generally made into poi. So perhaps some of you know poi, but poi is the preferred way of consuming taro. So there, on a portion of the refuge had been a lo'ikalo, or taro patches, between about 1500 and 1935. We have the last photo we can track down shows taro in that area where we decided to restore the taro patches up to about 1935. And then for some reason, we're not sure exactly why, but it was converted to sugarcane. Like much of central Maui was dominated by sugarcane from the mid 19th century up until just recently, I think 2000, 17, I think, is when the last sugar plantation closed. So after our work, what we set out to do was to create taro patches that could be repositories of rare varieties of taro. Hawaiians had somewhere around 600, between 400 and 600 varieties of taro, so very, very many. And those rare varieties, the ones that are not being cultivated for commercially, but have really hold or serve as a repository of our cultural knowledge and values, are curated there. So again, it was as you're going to see, it was very much a community effort. So, of course, restoring the lo'ikalo began by actually removing the invasive species. In this case, this is what we call koahaole, or Lucena leucocephala, a very highly aggressive Central American species that dominated the area. And that's me with a chainsaw getting into the lo'i and removing some of the roots. But you can see in the background, the lo'i, the taro patches are taking shape. And so next step, of course, was to get the kids in, bring the water in, get the kids involved, and soften the soil just as much as possible. And then bringing the water in, and in the foreground, in the orange shirt, is my son. So getting him involved, but you can see the process is making the soil soft so that it can be so that it can receive the huli, or the stalks, the taro stalks next. And of course, it's an excellent opportunity for everybody to get dirty, really, really dirty. So these young people here had a great time rebuilding this taro patch, or lo'ikalo. And again, many of them have deep, deep roots in Waihee. So very fun. And preparing the huli, the taro stalks, for planting. And literally by the end of the day, we had a restored taro patch, and had not been there for something like 75 years, and not been a working, functioning taro patch, lo'ikalos, since at least 1935. So with regard to education, so education is another element of what we do. So annually, we welcome between 2,500 and 3,000 students to the refuge, and that is divided between myself and my colleague Denby Freeland. But literally, we're very adaptive, and we've built curricula for students who are, literally from preschool all the way up through college. And so I teach at the university here as an adjunct faculty member in the sustainability program, and so I bring my students out annually and get them involved. And so we are, right now we're in a low phase, of course, of getting students out there because of the pandemic. However, we do anticipate getting more students out there very soon. So, I did write here, education is designed to teach the culture and history of Waihee. Really, what we're doing is we're using Waihee as a way of understanding the unfolding of all of Hawaiian history, because as I mentioned, every phase of Hawaiian history is represented abundantly in Waihee. So these phases of Hawaiian history can be discussed. So not only do you get a good understanding, if you come out as a student, not only do you get a clear understanding of the history of Waihee, you also gain a very clear understanding of how the entire history of the human history of Waihee, and truth be told, the geological history and the natural history as well. So here we are. This is my colleague on the right, Denby Freeland, who is a phenomenal kappa maker. She is teaching these kids here. Kappa is Hawaiian bark cloth made from the bark of the paper mulberry known as vauke. And so here she is teaching these young people. She's a phenomenal educator, and so she's teaching these young boys how to make kappa in the traditional style, using the traditional implements and tools. So, and then perhaps a student doesn't look as enthusiastic as we might hope, but he's getting his hands in the soil, Hulina Lima Ikalepo, helping us plant and get ready for our outplanting of native species in the wetlands. So here they are. This is from a group of students from a local middle school known as Kalama Elementary. So, and then of course we have our huaka'i maka'i, our guided hikes on the land. So what we also refer to them as our talk story on the land. So On average, HILT staff across Kapai Aina, across the archipelago, we lead about 60 hikes annually. At Waihee alone, those come out to about 40 to 45. This year, there's been a significant amount of pent-up demand, and so I think I looked at my numbers, which I track. I think I've led 15 just in the first 3 months of this year. So again, there's a huge amount of pent-up demand. We want to make sure that anybody who wants to go out to Waihee and wants a guided hike, if they can form a group, that we are eager to take them out there. We want to teach people. We do it as purely as a service. We cannot charge anything for any hike that we do. So we want to make sure that people get on the land, that they don't, that they can experience and learn to cultivate this sense of aloha aina. As you can see, the guiding principle that we have is that people will help to protect what they love, and they love what they know. If people are separated from the land, they cannot develop that sense of aloha aina, which is so critical to land conservation. As I oftentimes point out, at one point I will halai kapo. I will pass on into the next world, into the afterlife. And so I want to be able to share with anybody who comes on to the Aina of Waihee just how special this place is, so that they can perpetuate that. It's about perpetuating our sense of aloha Aina. And so I'll show you some of the photographs. So here we have a group of people. Again, this is specific to people from the area, from Waihee. This is standing on the sand dunes. Oh no, I'm getting a indication that my internet is unstable. Ted, am I connected still?
You're totally fine, Scott. We can see you just great.
Thank you, Karen. So this is a group from Waihee. Many of them, again, having roots. And the unfortunate thing is, between 1919 and until we really purchased the property, there were virtually no opportunities for people to go on the land. If you didn't have actual business on the land, you were not really welcome to go there. And so we have tried to change that. So that's this group here. And then again, here's me in the blue shirt near the front, leading a huaka'i maka'i, a enjoyable hike on the land. We're actually heading down into the wetlands here. One thing, I just want to mention also that we have a very robust camping program. So our camping program, we welcome probably about 2,000 people annually onto the land for camping. Of course, camping is free. We have 4 sites that people can select from, and we have it all online. My colleague James Crow set up a very a very easy to use. Even I'm very much a Luddite, but a very easy to use system that people can go on and register for campsites. And again, it's all free. Now, the one caveat we have with that is that during the process of actually having people on the land, we noticed that some people were not quite as respectful as others. We had some damage done to an archaeological site that was regrettable, and on just a very, very small percentage of instances, we had some damage to some native plants that we had planted. And I would like to think that these people were mainly operating out of ignorance, that they didn't know. The damage to the archaeological site seems to be clearly that case. So what we've done is we've asked people to, if they want to register to camp, that all they have to do is volunteer with us for 4 hours for 1 year, and for a full calendar year, or for the full year, you're welcome to camp anytime you want. So that camping program has become and again, another service that we can do for the community in order to engage them on the land. And again, the idea behind the volunteer program is simply to make sure that they understand before they come out on the land exactly what we are doing and why it's so important. And that has really solved virtually all the problems. Well, not virtually, all the problems that we've had. And so that's been a very successful program, our camping. So some some closing thoughts, mana opani. So the principles that have guided us over the last 17 years continue to guide us today, and that is I ola oi, I ola kakou no. So through your thriving, all of us will thrive. And Heali'i ka aina he kaua ke kanaka, as I mentioned earlier, is that we, when you are on the land, you are serving that land. That land is the chief, and we are the servants. And so we have to keep that in mind. And when I first started, within my first few months, I went and spoke with one of the really highly respected kupuna, or elders, from a different part of the island. But he gave me some ideas about how to approach the work that I was doing, and that was just simply listen to the kupuna. Listen to the elders. The elders can tell you the history of the land, the stories of the land. And so I did just that. I reached out to one of the kupuna in the area who has roots going back to about the 1300s to the 14th century in Waihee, and became very close friends with her. And that was a relationship that lasted until her passing just about a year ago. So I've been very, very fortunate to have become very close with many of the kupuna in the area, which was not hard. Maui is a very small community. It's a small enough community that if you don't know someone directly, you've got a network of people that you can connect with them through. So it was actually quite simple to make those connections. What was not simple was ensuring that everybody trusted us enough to take on this massive responsibility. What in Hawaii we call it kuleana. So with that, I will take a break and allow if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
We have some great questions in the chat, so I will
Okay.
read them to you and let you address them. So one is, how will rising seas due to climate change affect this area? And how will the conservation of the area address this?
Yes. Oh, excellent question, because that question is literally on my mind. Well, I don't want to say 24/7, but it's very frequently. And so I mentioned what I had been doing for the last 3 years between 2017 and 2019. The best approach we can take is to actually look to the past to see how it can guide us in the future. So as I mentioned, we've gone 12,000 years back in time, but about 6,000 years ago, you have what's called the mid-Holocene high stand. So the mid-Holocene high stand was a time when sea levels had actually risen significantly. And what we were very interested in saying is, well, what happened at that time? Because that is what we can anticipate happening, at some time in the future. We don't know how bad it's going to get in the future. We hope that it can be, we hope that our national political leaders can actually work diligently to slow down the rate of climate change and sea level rise. But what we can say is, here's how we can respond. And so the way that we can respond is look to the past to try and understand how that ecosystem responded. But we do realize that there may be nothing that we can do, and so we can respond. And so, from an ecosystem perspective, what we're really anticipating is trying to be as flexible to envision what an alternative stable state might look like. And so, an alternative stable state is just what will it look like if we do our best to be as resilient as possible? And so the creation of a forested bioshield, now I pointed out the one along the base of the sand dunes. We're also creating one along the coast. And we are using a particular tree that I mentioned earlier, known as Holla, that has an ideal tree architecture. And it looks, in some ways, the aerial roots look a little bit like a mangrove, and that we are hoping that if we have a big storm, if we have a tsunami, that those aerial roots can actually work to slow down the intensity of wave activity. So, and it's a lot more complex than that. We actually have a resilience plan in place. We're working with the community to build our resilience capacity. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question is, how do you use fire as a tool for restoration and vegetation management?
Yeah, good question. We don't, quite simply. if you look through the geological record, Hawaiian ecosystems are not formed by fire. On average, in any given area, we have a fire about every 6,000 years, excluding those areas where there are active volcanoes, obviously. But if you look at Waihee, on average, natural fires only occur about every 6,000 years. We don't have what are known as pyrophytic ecosystems. We don't have ecosystems that are shaped by fire. So when a fire does occur, that will kill the native plants that are not fire adapted. So the simple answer is we don't, and we are always responding to fires when they do occur to make sure that our native plants are as protected as possible.
Good, thank you. Here's one. How do you stem reinvasion by non-natives? Can you use spot treatment with herbicides?
Yes. Okay. So reinvasion, if we stop or if we clear an area, plant native species, and then just stop our work there, within about 6 months to a year, it will look like we didn't do anything. These invasive species are so aggressive. And again, what we're really focusing on as far as an ecosystem are ecosystem modifying invasive species. Ones that are more passive, we try and give, they're lower priority. So the simple answer is that's what we do. We spend about 10% of our time clearing and 90% of our time preventing reinvasion. So that's really where volunteers come in as a critical element of our restoration work, because there's a certain Zen nature to it, where you can just kind of get down on the ground and you're doing hand weeding and you're getting these invasive species before they get too big to pull out by hand. And we get in there and we just make sure that we're just tipping the scale towards the native species.
And their favorite.
So yeah.
Okay, that's a good one. We have Barbara, who's going to be in Maui at the end of December with her grandkids, and she's wondering if you'll be open for hikes, tourist hikes, or education. Obviously, you don't know what's going to happen, but
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I would be more than happy to. Just, I guess you have my email, so just go ahead. You can go ahead and share my email. I think it's actually on my website, on the website HILT.org as well. So it's really easy to get a hold of me. Just let me know sometimes. The more flexibility, the better. I actually am doing some work in Madagascar, and I don't know when I'm going back down there. It's looking like it's going to be more like August, September. So yes, please do. Please contact me. I would be more than happy to show you around the refuge on Huaka'i Maka'ikai.
Wow. We will send a link to this recording to everyone after the presentation, and it'll have your contact information and any other materials you want to provide. So everyone will have that. They don't have to write anything down now. Here's a good one. Do you train volunteer hike leaders? And if so, how?
That's a really good question. And we haven't yet. And that, we have interns, and I've actually trained some interns, but oftentimes they're university or college students, and they go away. And so we've done that in the past. And the way that we have found most effective is just have them shadow us. Shadow me. Mainly the hikes are led by myself and my colleague Denby, our education coordinator. We're actually very receptive to that idea, but just have not actually implemented it. But what we are doing, this is a really exciting aspect of our community outreach work, is to do an app. So if you want to go on a hike at Waihee, in fact, we're going to be doing the recording probably in the next week or two. What you'll do is you'll download an app on your phone, and from that you will get a series, probably about 20 sites, that will give you the whole history. So it's as close an approximation as we can do, but there's no better thing than to have an actual person that you can interact with. So I would see, I can see in the next few years that we could have, docents is really what we've talked about it for a long time, but just never acted on it. So
yeah, this question was asked by one of our extraordinary hike leaders, and
awesome. Okay.
we, Save Mount Diablo, have a number of hike leaders that we could not possibly manage the work we do without them, and volunteers. So we appreciate that. So if you ever want any tips on how we do it, of course you can contact us. But
that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a great plan in place, and I feel like we've really made some great strides in education of the hike leaders, and it's been wonderful. So
awesome, excellent.
Let's see here. Blah blah blah. Oh, Seth was asking how the Hawaiian Coots and Stilts are doing. I'm guessing they might be birds, but I don't know.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Okay, look at that.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. The Fulika alai is the alai ke'okeo, or the Hawaiian Coot, and the Hemantopus mexicanus canutseni is the Hawaiian Stilt, or IO. Their numbers are increasing. It's a very, very positive thing. I just heard a statistic, something like in the United States, over the last 50 years, we are down 33%, roughly 1/3 of all bird populations have decreased. So the Hawaiian Stilt and the Hawaiian Coots were perilously close. They think they were down into the low 1,000. I think 1,200 was the bottom. And with the Stilt, we're now up to, if I recall correctly, about 2,000 individuals. And with the Coot, we're just a little bit lower than that. The Nene, when I was young, the year I was born, there were no Nene. They had all been taken away to England in order to protect them from predation by mongoose. But they reintroduced them on Hawaii Island and Maui, and now we are seeing actual growing populations of Nene. That's the Hawaiian goose. Just to kind of put into perspective the avian history of the Hawaiian Islands, when the first people stepped ashore, there were in the Hawaiian Islands, there were about 109 bird species across the archipelago. Right now, we are down to about 16 non-seabird species. There's about 21 species of seabirds, but we're down to about 16. Most of those are passerines. A number of them are wetlands birds, but in Hawaii, we have suffered catastrophic losses. Now, those catastrophic losses are not just, extinction, of course, means that you lose you lose a huge element of who you are as a land. And so, but more importantly, I don't know if it's more important, but equally important is that you lose ecological function. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when we lost most of our seabirds, so Maui again, this is a very rough estimate, but prior to humans arriving, and especially the arrival of the Hawaiian rat, or I should say the Pacific rat, Rattus exulans, prior to the introduction, of course, Hawaii had no native mammals, no terrestrial mammals. But when the first people arrived, there were probably millions of seabirds on this particular island. Well, those seabirds are the nutrient exchange between the ocean and the land. And so there's a critical role that they played by bringing all that guano, and that facilitated the growth of native plant species. Well, you take that away, and all of a sudden you bring in all these invasive species, and the invasive species have left their predators, and they don't need that guano because they're not co-evolved with that abundant nutrient source. And so it's what happens is it's a positive feedback loop, and you just get all these changes. And so we're dealing with that. So
yeah, Stacy commented that two Nene regularly visit her sister's house in the West Maui Mountains.
Yes, yeah. I know they're around the Launiopoko area. Yeah, and I have a farm in West Maui, a breadfruit farm, what we call an Ulu farm, and we get visits by them now. We get 6, and they love our farm because, of course, we mow the grass to keep the Panica maximum, the native grass. And so we are actually seeing more and more of them. It's exciting. It's a very exciting thing.
Oh, cool. She said that's where we live in
Launiopoko. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I messed that one up.
That's all right.
Okay, I'm pretty good, but Hawaiian, that's
good.
a whole new level for me. Here's another question. Speaking of passerines, are there any honey creepers left that are benefiting from your restoration efforts?
There are honey creepers that are definitely benefiting from restoration efforts. I can't say at Waihe'e, or we tend to work in the lower elevation areas, and due to avian malaria, introduction of predators, including the rat, the mongoose, the cat, dogs, humans, they are no longer found in the low elevation areas, at least on Maui. There's some lower elevation areas on Kauai that they'll be seen, but sadly, no. All the birds that benefit from our work are seabirds, particularly the wedge-tailed shearwater, the uaukani, and water birds. So that, yeah.
Oh. Well, thank you. I think that's all the questions. I can't thank you enough, Scott, for this presentation.
Oh, this was so much fun.
So great to see another land trust and the work they do. And I love that we support each other in through other ways. And it's just amazing. So thank you.
Well, yeah, you're welcome. And I did, of course, I think it was 3 years ago, 3 years, 2018. We came out to save Mount Diablo. Just amazing work that all of you are doing. And of course, we miss Ted immensely. He and I had such a fun time working together. And of course, I also want to point out, and I should have earlier in my last just mention, I want to point out that Ted was responsible for the naming of the talk story on the land. So he is
right.
I should credit him for that.
Yeah, prior to working at Save Mount Diablo, Ted was the executive director at the Hawaiian Islands Land Trust. So we all have this nice community. Yeah, and I thank you again. And to everyone on the presentation, we'll send out a link to the recording, all the contact information. If you want to share it with friends, if you have any questions for us, we'd love to hear it. In the comments right now, there's a lot of gushing on how wonderful the presentation is and how much we appreciate it. So it's just on behalf of me and everyone else here, thank you again.
Thank you so much. This is what really appreciate it. And, love California. I was stationed in Camp Pendleton. And so California ecosystems are amazing. Love California. So
come visit us anytime.
So we
always love to have you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye.